Clearhaven's winter morning was bright enough to make the frozen lake look perfectly safe. But behind a roadside windbreak, a freezing German shepherd lay wrapped around one red backpack. Briar was too weak to stand, yet every time Grant Sutter reached for the bag, one injured paw tightened over its strap. The former Navy SEAL soon realized the dog was not protecting an object, she was holding a command for someone who had not returned. Far beneath the ice, that missing woman was keeping an aging water system from failing around her. To bring her home, Grant would have to stop carrying every responsibility alone and trust an entire town to share the weight. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help Valor and Paw Stories reach 1,000 subscribers. Clearhaven looked almost unreal beneath the morning sun. Fresh snow lay over the steep roofs and narrow porches of the lakeside town, turning ordinary buildings into clean white shapes against a pale blue sky. Strands of festival lights still glowed above Main Street, dim but visible in the daylight. Beyond the shops, the frozen lake stretched wide and bright, its surface crossed by temporary fences, orange markers, and the dark silhouettes of workers assembling the starting gate for the weekend snowmobile race. From a distance, the town appeared peaceful. Grant Sutter had spent enough years studying emergencies to distrust appearances. He drove east in a county response vehicle, moving away from the music, generators, and voices near the festival grounds. His assignment that morning was routine: inspect a mobile first aid station, confirm that the Eastern Service Road remained accessible, and check the secondary evacuation route before visitors began arriving in larger numbers. Routine work suited him. Routine meant numbered lists, verified exits, charged radios, and equipment placed where it belonged. It meant nothing had yet gone wrong. Grant rested one hand on the steering wheel and glanced at the map clipped beside the dashboard. At 52, he still carried the compact strength of a man accustomed to physical work, but there was nothing theatrical in the way he held himself. His shoulders were broad beneath a Navy rescue jacket, his movements economical. Gray had begun to spread through his ash-brown hair and short beard, softening a face made severe by high cheekbones and eyes that rarely stopped measuring distance. Under the jacket, he wore an olive-drab combat shirt with camouflage sleeves and dark bands around the upper arms. It was practical clothing, not nostalgia. At least, that was what he told himself. The stopped watch on his left wrist caught the sunlight when he adjusted the heater. 2:17. The hands had not moved in years. Grant turned his wrist away. The road narrowed beside a wall of pines. Snowbanks rose on either side, cut cleanly by the county plow. The festival grounds were no longer visible. Out here, the only structures were an abandoned observation hut, a weathered equipment shed, and a line of windbreak panels installed to keep drifting snow from burying the service route. He nearly drove past the flash of orange. It appeared low behind one of the panels, too brief and too regular to be a piece of litter moving in the wind. Grant braked. For several seconds, he remained behind the wheel, watching the place where the color had appeared. Nothing moved. He reached for the radio. "East Service Route Marker 12, he said, stopping to inspect something behind the windbreak. Naomi Vance answered from the temporary command station near the festival grounds. Her voice was steady, as it always was. "Copy. Check back in 2 minutes." Grant stepped out into air sharp enough to sting his teeth. The sunlight had warmth in its color, but none in its touch. Snow compressed beneath his boots as he moved around the windbreak. At first, he saw only a red backpack lying against the base of the panel. Then the shape around it raised its head. A German shepherd lay curled tightly over the pack. The dog's coat was black and dark honey, though much of the lower body was crusted with frost. A burgundy thermal vest clung wetly around the chest and belly, its silver reflective strip responsible for the flash Grant had seen from the road. The shepherd was female, lean and long-bodied, built for movement rather than brute force. Her right ear stood rigidly upright. The left had a small triangular notch near the outer edge and tilted toward Grant as he approached. She did not bark. That concerned him more than barking would have. Her breathing came in short, shallow pulls. Fine tremors moved through her ribs. One front paw was scraped, and the pads beneath it had gone pale with cold. Snow had collected along her tail and between the hairs of her legs. Grant crouched several feet away. Easy. The dog watched him with amber eyes. There was fatigue in them, but not confusion. She knew where she was. She knew what she was doing. Grant examined the snow around her before moving closer. The hollow beneath her body was not deep. Wind had dusted the top of her back, but it had not buried her flanks. The tracks nearest the backpack remained visible beneath the loose powder. 2 hours, perhaps 3. Not all night. That distinction might be the difference between a difficult recovery and a fatal one. Grant pulled off one glove and slowly extended his hand, not toward the dog, but toward the pack. A low growl came from her throat. It was not loud. It was barely more than vibration. The shepherd lifted her scraped paw and placed it firmly across the backpack's shoulder strap. Grant stopped. The dog did not bare her teeth. She did not lunge. She simply lowered her head again and held his gaze. He understood working dogs well enough to recognize the difference between possession and duty. Food aggression carried tension through the jaw and shoulders. Fear scattered the eyes, searching for escape. This was neither. This was a position being held, a command being obeyed. "You were told to stay," Grant said quietly. The shepherd's ear shifted at the sound of his voice. Grant sat back on his heels. Every instinct trained into him through military and rescue work urged efficiency. Remove the dog from the cold, secure the object, search the area, move. But force would turn a controlled animal into a frightened one, and fear would cost them time. Grant unzipped his rescue jacket and shrugged out of it. Beneath it, the fitted olive combat shirt offered little protection against the wind, but he barely noticed. He spread the jacket along the exposed side of the shepherd, creating a barrier between her body and the air coming through the trees. She followed every movement. Grant placed his bare hand palm down on the snow between them. Not close enough to threaten, close enough to offer a choice. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Cold traveled from the ground into his fingers. His hand began to ache. The shepherd's trembling continued beneath the jacket. Grant did not move. He had learned long ago that patience could be a form of action. He had simply forgotten that it did not always require control. The shepherd's nostrils flared. She leaned forward by an inch, stopped, then lowered her muzzle to the back of his hand. The contact was brief and cold. A single touch of the nose. Then she withdrew and laid her paw back over the strap. Something tightened behind Grant's ribs. Not sentiment, not yet. Recognition. She had accepted his presence, but not transferred the responsibility. "That's fair," he murmured. He reached slowly toward her collar instead of the bag. The metal identification plate was rimmed with ice. He rubbed it clean with his thumb. Briar. Below the name was a phone number and the words, "Dr. Tessa Marlowe, Environmental Field Unit." Grant called the number. The first attempt rang until voicemail. The second did the same. On the third, he listened more closely, as though silence itself might reveal something. Nothing. He radioed Naomi. "I have a working German shepherd, female, hypothermic but responsive. Name is Briar. She's guarding a field pack and won't separate from it. Owner is Dr. Tessa Marlowe. No answer." There was a short pause. "Tessa Marlowe is the hydrologist doing the ice certification. Naomi said. "She was supposed to check in at 8. Grant looked toward the service road stretching south between the trees. "What time is it?" 8:43. The shepherd raised her head when Naomi's voice came through the radio. Grant noticed then that the backpack was not simply lying beneath her. Briar had positioned herself around it so that her chest covered the top zipper and her injured paw pinned the carrying strap. Whatever Tessa had asked her to protect, Briar had arranged her entire body around that order. Naomi arrived 6 minutes later in the rescue truck. She climbed down with the calm, deliberate movement that made frantic people listen to her. At 47, Naomi Vance carried herself with the grounded strength of someone who had spent years making decisions in bad weather and worse conditions. Her dark rescue jacket was marked Vance across the chest, and a silver whistle hung from a red cord near her collar. She assessed Briar without crowding her. "We move both," she said. Grant nodded. Neither of them suggested taking the backpack first. They opened a low rescue litter beside Briar and covered it with a thermal pad. Grant stayed near the dog's head while Naomi worked from the side. Each time the litter shifted, Briar's paw tightened over the strap. "Easy," Grant said. "The pack goes too." He slid one hand under the backpack and the other beneath the edge of Briar's chest. Naomi supported the dog's hips. Together they lifted animal and pack as one unit. Briar made a strained sound but did not snap. Her head remained angled toward the bag until it was settled against her chest on the litter. Only then did her eyes close for a moment. The change was so small that Naomi might not have noticed. Grant did. "She was waiting for that," he said. "For what?" "To know it wasn't being left behind." They secured the litter inside the heated rescue truck. Naomi contacted Dr. Mira Ellison, the local veterinarian, who agreed to meet them at the clinic near the command station. Before leaving, Grant returned to the place where Briar had been found. The snow told a story, though not a complete one. Tracks from a compact utility snowmobile approached from the north, turned awkwardly near the windbreak, then continued south. One runner had cut deeper than the other, suggesting damage or uneven weight. Several yards farther on, the vehicle tracks merged with the freshly plowed road and disappeared. Near the backpack were boot prints, smaller than Grant's, likely a woman's. They faced south. Beside them ran a shallow drag mark no more than 3 feet long. Someone had stopped there. Someone had lowered the pack to the ground. Then that person had left on foot. Grant stood and scanned the bright winter landscape. There was no darkness to hide in, no storm, no dramatic horizon. The sky remained clear, the snow brilliant, the distant festival music faintly audible through the trees. That made the emptiness more unsettling. Whatever had happened here had not needed darkness. At the veterinary clinic, Mira Ellison took control before Grant could ask for an update. She was small and quick-moving, with short, dark blonde hair and a sage-green scrub top visible beneath her coat. Her voice remained soft around Briar and became sharply practical whenever she addressed the humans. "Moderate hypothermia," she said after the first examination. "Mild dehydration, cold injury to the pads, but I don't see deep tissue damage yet. We warm her gradually, no aggressive heat. No walking her around because someone thinks she looks alert." The last sentence was aimed directly at Grant. "I wasn't going to." Mira gave him a look, suggesting she had heard that before from many people. Briar was placed on padded blankets with controlled warming packs along her torso. A catheter was fitted for warmed fluids. The burgundy vest had to be cut away where frozen fabric adhered to the fur. Through it all, Briar became restless only when a technician moved the backpack beyond reach. Grant noticed her breathing change before anyone else did. "Bring it back," he said. Mira glanced at him, then at the dog. The pack was returned and placed beside Briar's shoulder. Her breathing slowed. Mira studied the animal for several seconds. "That isn't attachment to the object," she said. "No. It's work." Grant looked down at Briar's scraped paw resting across the strap. "Yes." The door to the treatment area opened. Naomi stepped in, holding her radio near her chest. "The festival office confirmed Tessa missed the safety meeting. No one has seen her since before sunrise." Behind Naomi stood Miles Corbett, the county water system technician. He was younger than the others, pale from the cold and visibly uneasy. He kept rubbing his thumb along the edge of his phone. "I got a call from her," he said. "Around 5:40, signal kept cutting out. I thought she was outside the South Station checking a sensor." "What did she say?" Grant asked. Miles swallowed. "Not much I could understand. I heard Gate 4, then something about the South Shore. I asked her to repeat it, but the line dropped." "Did you call back?" "Twice. It went to voicemail." Grant's jaw tightened, not at Miles, but at the shape of the morning coming into focus. A missing hydrologist, a working dog ordered to guard technical equipment, a damaged utility track leading south. Outside the clinic windows, sunlight glittered over the frozen lake. Workers in bright jackets still moved around the festival grounds, unaware that anything had changed. Grant stood behind the glass of the treatment room. Briar lay beneath a thermal blanket, eyes half closed from exhaustion. Her body had finally stopped trembling so violently, but one front paw remained on the dark red backpack. Even unconsciousness had not fully released her from the command. And somewhere beyond the clear windows and festive lights, the person who had given that command had not come back. By 9:15, the veterinary clinic no longer felt like a place built for animals. Radios crowded the reception counter. A county map had been unfolded across the examination room table. Naomi Vance stood near the window speaking with the sheriff's office, while Grant remained beside the treatment room glass, watching Briar breathe beneath the thermal blanket. The dog's condition had stabilized, but stability was not recovery. Dr. Mira Ellison had made that distinction twice. Briar's temperature was rising slowly. Warmed fluids moved through a line taped to her front leg. The damaged pads had been cleaned and loosely wrapped, and a monitor clipped near her chest tracked a heart rate that was still too slow for Mira's comfort. The dark red backpack remained beside the dog. Grant had not touched it since bringing it inside. That changed when Naomi ended the call. "The sheriff authorized the search," she said. "Tessa is officially listed as missing during a public safety assignment. Anything in the pack that could help locate her or identify a hazard is covered." Naomi's tone held no triumph. Permission did not make the decision feel less invasive. Grant looked through the glass once more. Briar's eyes were closed, but one paw still rested against the pack. "Do it where she can see us," he said. Mira glanced up from the monitor. "Why?" "Because she was ordered to guard it. Taking it into another room might look like losing it." Mira studied him for a moment, then pulled a second table closer to the treatment enclosure. "Fine, but keep your voices down." Naomi placed the backpack on the table. Up close, it was clearly not ordinary luggage. A faded patch on the outer flap showed the emblem of the Wisconsin Environmental Field Unit. A reflective strip beneath it carried Tessa Marlowe's name and an emergency contact code. The side pocket held a sealed identification card, and a yellow tab near the zipper was printed with a warning. "Field data. Do not separate from assigned operator." Grant noticed that Briar opened one eye when Naomi touched the zipper. "She's watching," Naomi said. "She's working," Mira corrected. Naomi unfastened the main compartment. The contents had been packed with disciplined care. A waterproof temperature probe lay inside a padded sleeve. Beneath it were folded lake maps, a handheld GPS unit, spare batteries, medication marked for Briar, a compact waterproof recorder, and a steel key attached to a numbered tag. Gate access, S4. Grant set the key on the table. It landed with a heavier sound than its size suggested. Naomi removed a laminated equipment list and compared it with the contents. Several items were marked as assigned but were not in the pack. A headlamp, personal gas detector, handheld radio, compact tool roll, and secondary access key. She didn't abandon her equipment, Naomi said. She took what she needed to enter somewhere. And left the data where it could be recovered, Grant replied. Mira turned from Briar. With the dog guarding it. The distinction mattered. Tessa had not simply dropped a bag and gone missing. She had separated the information from herself, placed it under protection, and continued with enough equipment to perform a technical inspection. That made the choice deliberate. It also meant Tessa had expected someone to find Briar. Naomi powered on the GPS unit. The battery indicator showed less than 10%. A route appeared over the frozen outline of Clearhaven Lake. The track began along the eastern inspection corridor, moved north toward the abandoned observation station, then curved sharply back south. Near the place where Grant had found Briar, the route paused for 7 minutes. After that, it continued toward the southern pumping facility before ending less than a quarter-mile from the structure. Grant leaned closer. The unit stayed with the pack, he said. So this is Briar's return route, Naomi replied, not Tessa's final position. A second layer showed recorded timestamps. Tessa and Briar had reached the northern station shortly after 5. By 5:30, they were moving south. At 5:52, the GPS stopped beside the windbreak. Grant pictured the scene without needing it explained. A damaged utility sled, Tessa realizing she could not carry every piece of equipment, the dog still mobile enough to return with the pack, daylight not yet fully established. She sent Briar back to a known checkpoint, he said. Naomi nodded. Where the morning inspection team was scheduled to pass. Grant looked at the clock on the clinic wall. Tessa's plan had worked. Just later than she had intended. Naomi unfolded the first map. Thin red marks crossed the eastern side of the lake in a long, narrow band. They did not spread outward like a crack. They followed the shape of an older channel beneath the ice. A series of handwritten temperatures ran beside the line. 33.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 34.1 degrees Fahrenheit, 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The numbers looked harmless until Grant compared them with the readings outside the marked corridor. Near freezing, consistent, stable. The red route was different by only a few degrees, but it remained different across nearly half a mile. Is that enough to matter? He asked. Naomi did not answer. Hydrology was not her field, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Miles Corbett had been standing near the doorway since arriving. At 36, he had the narrow build of someone accustomed to control rooms rather than field labor. His brown hair had been flattened by a knit cap he still held between both hands. Anxiety made his fingers work continuously along the fabric's edge. He stepped closer to the map. Deep lake water stays around 39 degrees in winter, he said. That doesn't sound warm, but if it's moving under the ice, it can weaken it from below. Why would it be moving there? Grant asked. Miles pointed to the red corridor. There's an old circulation channel under this section, or there used to be. The digital plan says it was isolated years ago. Does isolated mean filled, closed, or assumed closed? Miles hesitated. I'd have to check the legacy records. Grant did not respond immediately. He had worked with enough aging systems to know the danger in that sentence. Assumed closed was not the same as closed. Not on paper. Not in steel. Not under pressure. Naomi powered on the waterproof recorder. The first files contained only brief field notes, Tessa's voice was practical and unhurried, accompanied by the scrape of boots and the faint hum of wind. Eastern grid, 0.6, surface depth acceptable, lower layer showing irregular separation. A pause. 0.7. Temperature rise continues along the old channel. In the next recording, the wind was stronger. Flow direction is south to north. Likely source near the pumping system. Gate 4 may not be sealing. Grant watched Miles. The technician's face had gone still. The final file began with engine noise and a sharp metallic rattle. Tessa's breathing was faster now, not from panic, but exertion. Warning transmitted to county operations. Delivery status unknown. Static cut across several words. No vehicle traffic on the eastern race corridor until verified. A mechanical clank sounded nearby, then Tessa's voice changed, not softer, more precise. Briar, guard. The dog's head lifted beneath the blanket. Every person in the room stopped moving. The recording continued. Hold. Briar's amber eyes opened fully. Her wrapped paw pressed harder against the backpack. The reaction lasted only seconds, but it changed the room. Until then, they had been examining equipment, routes, and numbers. Now Tessa's voice had crossed the hours between the frozen service road and the clinic. Briar had not guarded the bag because she feared losing it. She had heard that exact voice give that exact command. Grant felt something cold settle beneath his ribs that had nothing to do with the winter outside. The recorder hissed again. If this pack is recovered, stop access to the eastern corridor. I'm going to the south pumping station to inspect Gate 4 manually. Utility sled has damaged steering. Briar is returning with the data. There was a final burst of wind, then the recording ended. For several moments, no one spoke. Miles was the first. She called me after this. Grant turned toward him. Miles looked down at the map instead of meeting his eyes. I heard Gate 4. I heard south. But the signal was breaking up and she'd already filed an inspection route. I thought she was confirming where she was going. You asked her to repeat it, Naomi said. Yes. And called back. Twice. Naomi's answer was calm. Then we document the failure and fix the failure later. Right now, we use what we have. Grant recognized the purpose in her words. Miles was already blaming himself. Crushing him further would not find Tessa. It was a lesson Grant understood intellectually and often failed to practice. He looked back at the recorder. The evidence now formed a clearer sequence. Tessa had detected a thermal anomaly beneath the race corridor. She had attempted to report it. Her utility sled had suffered steering damage. Rather than carry all the equipment into an uncertain industrial space, she had sent Briar back with the duplicated data and emergency access key, trusting that someone would find them along the scheduled inspection route. Then she had continued south, alone. Competent, reasoned, still dangerous. The clinic door opened, and Elena Cross entered with cold air at her back. Clearhaven's mayor was 39, dressed not in ceremonial winter clothing, but in a charcoal coat over a practical wool suit. Snow clung to the shoulders. Her dark hair had been pinned quickly rather than neatly, and the tension in her face showed she had come directly from the festival grounds. "What do we know?" she asked. Naomi gave her the facts without drama. Missing hydrologist, possible failure at Gate 4, abnormal temperatures under the eastern course, 2 trucks and a towing unit already positioned on the lake. Elena listened without interrupting. "Do we have confirmation that the ice is unsafe?" "Not yet," Naomi said. "We have enough to treat the corridor as suspect." The mayor looked through the treatment room glass at Briar. "What happens if we shut everything down?" Grant expected the question to irritate him. It did not entirely. A town had responsibilities beyond a single emergency. Shops had ordered inventory. Seasonal workers depended on the weekend. Visitors were already traveling toward Clearhaven. Asking about consequences was not the same as denying danger. "We don't need to shut down everything," Naomi said. "Not yet. Stop all movement on the Eastern Lake Corridor. Keep land-based activities operating while we verify." Elena nodded once. "Do it." She stepped aside and called the Festival Command Office. Her language was direct. "Suspend all lake access east of Marker 21. Freeze vehicle movement until safe withdrawal routes were established. Continue only the activities taking place on shore." No attempt was made to soften the instruction, no mention of panic. While Elena issued the order, Naomi called the County Resources Office and requested a certified ice assessment team. Grant turned toward the steel key. "Who knows the South Pumping Station?" Miles answered reluctantly. "Russell Pike." The name seemed to carry history with it. "Current operator?" Grant asked. "Senior systems engineer. He's retiring this spring. He worked on the original intake modifications." "Call him." Miles did. Russell arrived 20 minutes later, wearing a faded navy cap and an old brown work vest over a gray-blue flannel shirt. He was 61, thin through the shoulders, with a long face, a heavy gray mustache, and hands permanently marked by machinery despite years of washing. He did not ask for a summary first. His eyes went directly to the steel key on the table. "Where did that come from?" "Tessa's pack," Naomi said. Russell picked it up and examined the stamped number. For the first time since entering, the older man looked uncertain. "That key isn't for the main station door." "What is it for?" Grant asked. Russell placed it back down carefully. "There's an access level under the south building, old pressure balancing corridor. It was sealed from regular service before Miles started working here." Miles frowned. "It's not on the current drawings." "No." "Why not?" Russell removed his cap and ran a hand over thinning silver hair. "Because the conversion plans were incomplete. We were supposed to add the lower corridor during digitization, but half the paper set was damaged. Everyone who knew the layout still worked here, so we operated around it." Grant heard the phrase beneath the explanation. Everyone who knew. Knowledge held in people instead of systems. A temporary solution allowed to become permanent. Russell's eyes stayed on the key. If Tessa went through that door, she was trying to reach the manual balance controls. Grant reached for his jacket. "We move now." Naomi stepped between him and the door, not confrontationally, simply occupying the path. "We deploy now," she corrected. "Search team, air monitoring, technical support, and an ice team. You do not walk into an undocumented underground structure because you recognize the word manual." Every second of Grant's past seemed to argue against her. Move before conditions worsen, reach the missing person, accept risk. But another part of him saw the backpack, the duplicated records, Tessa's recorded warning. She had left information behind because she knew one person should not carry the entire problem into the dark. Grant looked at Naomi. "Who takes technical command?" "Russell advises systems. I command rescue operations. You coordinate evacuation and interagency response until the confined space team arrives." It was not the role Grant wanted. It was the role the situation required. He nodded. As they prepared to leave, Briar shifted beneath the blanket. Her front legs moved as though she meant to stand. Mira was beside her immediately. "No." Briar pushed once against the bedding, weak but determined. Mira placed one hand against her shoulder and looked toward Grant. "She is not going anywhere. Her core temperature is improving, but her pads are injured and her heart has been under stress. Wanting to work is not the same as being medically able to work." Grant understood the sentence was meant for more than the dog. He picked up the backpack. Briar's head rose higher, her eyes fixed on it. Grant stopped, then lowered the bag beside the treatment bed. He crouched until his face was level with hers. The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth because they belonged to someone else. Hold. Briar's ears shifted. For one suspended second, Grant wondered whether she would reject the command from him. Then she lowered her head. Not fully relaxed, not surrendering, accepting. Her eyes remained on Grant as he stood and walked toward the door. He left the backpack beside her. Outside, Clearhaven was still bright with reflected snow and festival lights. But now the eastern edge of the lake was emptying. Vehicle engines were going silent, and a steel key marked S4 had given the morning a direction. South. The south pumping station stood apart from the rest of Clearhaven. It was a low concrete building pressed into the slope above the lake, half hidden by snowbanks and old spruce trees. No festival lights reached this far. The only color came from a faded warning sign beside the entrance and the orange flagging tape Naomi had tied across the service road. Grant parked behind the county utility truck. Russell Pike was already out of the vehicle before the engine stopped. The older engineer moved with unexpected speed, one hand clutching his blue-black notebook while the other searched through a ring of maintenance keys. "The main lock should be electronic," Miles said, following him. "Tessa's access would have registered." "It did," Naomi replied. She held up the tablet linked to the county system. "South station door opened at 6:03, Tessa's secondary credential. No exit recorded." Grant looked at the building. No broken window, no forced hinge. No sign that anyone had entered behind her. Tessa had come here by choice. Russell keyed in the override code. The heavy door released with a dull mechanical click. Inside, the air smelled of cold metal, damp concrete, and old machine oil. Fluorescent lights flickered awake one row at a time, revealing pipes painted in faded industrial colors and a narrow aisle between control cabinets. Nothing appeared damaged. That made Grant more alert, not less. A violent failure would have announced itself. A silent system could continue deteriorating while everyone assumed it was stable. Miles went to the main console. "Gate 4 still reads closed." Russell leaned over his shoulder. "That indicator only reads actuator position. It doesn't tell you whether the gate is sealing." Miles's jaw tightened. "The flow sensor is normal." "The same sensor Tessa marked as unreliable?" Miles did not answer. Grant moved deeper into the station. A yellow headlamp rested on the floor near a drainage grate. It was not broken, but its strap was wet. Beside it, shallow boot prints crossed a patch of dirty meltwater and ended at the rear wall. There, behind a rack of coiled hoses, a low steel door stood open by several inches. Russell stopped when he saw it. "I haven't opened that in 8 years." Naomi switched on her flashlight. "Where does it lead?" "Maintenance stairs, then the balance corridor." "Distance?" "Maybe 70 feet down and another 100 toward the lake. Depends which section is still accessible." Grant crouched near the doorway. A safety cable had been pulled from its wall hook and fed into the darkness. The metal surface around the opening was streaked with fresh moisture. Tessa had anchored herself before descending. She'd planned enough to protect against a fall, not enough to come back. Naomi removed a portable gas meter from the emergency cabinet. She held the sensor wand through the opening without entering. The display settled. Oxygen 18.4%. Lower than normal. Miles stared at the number. "That's not immediately fatal." "No," Naomi said. "It is immediately unacceptable." Grant shone his light past the threshold. Concrete steps disappeared into blackness. Somewhere below, water dripped at slow, uneven intervals. Tessa has been down there for hours. And she will still be down there if you collapse halfway to her, Naomi replied. We have a line. We do not have ventilation, a retrieval team, or continuous air monitoring. Grant stood. His impatience did not come from believing Naomi was wrong. It came from knowing she was right and hating the cost of it. Every rescue had a point where preparation felt indistinguishable from delay. The difference only became visible afterward, when everyone came home, or when they did not. Naomi met his eyes. One missing person, she said quietly. We are not turning that into 3. Grant looked past her toward the open hatch. The stopped watch pressed against his wrist beneath his glove. He did not touch it. Call confined space rescue, he said. Naomi was already reaching for the radio. Cole Haskett arrived 28 minutes later with a 4-person technical team from the neighboring county. He stepped from the lead truck wearing a black-gray rescue coat with muted reflective bands. He was 46, lean rather than broad, clean-shaven, with silver beginning at the sides of his short dark hair. A pale scar crossed his right eyebrow, but his face carried none of the hard performance Grant had seen in men who wanted their injuries noticed. Cole listened to Naomi's briefing without interrupting. Then he looked at the hatch. No entry until forced air is established, he said. Grant folded his arms. We know someone is inside. Cole turned toward him. That changes the urgency. It does not change the atmosphere. There was no challenge in his voice. That made the statement harder to resist. The team unloaded a ventilation blower, collapsible ducting, tripods, retrieval lines, medical oxygen, and additional gas meters. One rescuer established a control board at the entrance, while another fixed anchor points into the concrete floor. Cole marked the main line with his short red rope, each knot set at a measured interval. Grant watched him work. You always use that line? It tells me distance without needing light. Custom length? Standard equipment gets treated like a promise. I prefer knowing exactly where mine ends. Grant understood the answer. Not distrust of tools, distrust of assumptions. While Cole's team prepared the descent, Naomi sent Grant outside. Hannah Keene is on the east corridor, she said. She needs someone with authority to coordinate access. You have authority. I am running the underground operation. I should be here. You should be where the next preventable casualty is. The words landed harder than an order. Grant looked once toward the open hatch, where the ventilation duct now trembled as air pushed into the darkness. Then he walked to his vehicle. The eastern lake looked harmless under the midday sun. That was the problem. The surface stretched white and level beneath the winter sky. Tire tracks crossed it in orderly lines. Temporary race fencing cast thin blue shadows across the snow. Nothing in the landscape suggested that the ice beneath it had begun losing its strength. Hannah Keene stood beside a portable radar sled near marker 23. Her mustard-colored technical jacket made her easy to spot from a distance. A long braid of red-brown hair, threaded with silver, rested against the back of her collar. She held an orange measuring staff in one hand and studied a series of layered images on a tablet. Hannah acknowledged Grant with a brief nod. Surface thickness is misleading, she said. Show me. She turned the screen toward him. The upper ice appeared as a clean, bright band. Beneath it, darker gaps interrupted the lower layers. This section measures more than 14 inches overall, Hannah said, but only 3.5 inches are continuous load-bearing ice. Grant looked across the route where the race would have run. And elsewhere? Variable. Some areas are sound. Others have internal separation and honeycombing. The warm current is moving through the old shallow channel. Warm meaning? About 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Not warm to a person, warm enough to damage freezing structure if it keeps moving beneath it. She drove the measuring staff into the snow beside a newly drilled test hole. The lake isn't melting upward from the surface, it is being cut from underneath. The sentence changed the way Grant saw the entire expanse. The bright surface was not protection, it was concealment. A radio call came through from the festival operations team. One of the equipment trucks had stopped near the western edge of the restricted zone. The driver had been ordered to withdraw, but could no longer use the planned route. Hannah's latest tests had identified weak ice directly ahead. Grant lifted the binoculars from his vehicle. The truck was visible half a mile out, carrying lighting frames on a flatbed. A smaller towing unit sat behind it. Both had entered before the closure and were now stranded between newly marked hazard zones. Damon Rusk approached on a lightweight snowmobile. He wore a heavy black work jacket and no expression of defiance. At 50, Damon had the thick neck and reddened face of a man who spent most of winter outdoors. His concern was practical, not political. "If those drivers turn sharply, they load the rear axle," he said. "If they reverse along the same path, they cross the channel twice." "Hannah?" She studied the radar map. "There's a stronger line north of them. Narrow but continuous." "Can the truck reach it?" "If it moves slowly and doesn't bunch up with the tow unit." Damon pointed toward 2 lightweight utility sleds near shore. "I can send those out with long lines. No heavy recovery vehicle." Grant weighed the positions. At the pumping station, Tessa remained underground. On the lake, 3 adults sat inside vehicles over compromised ice. The old instinct rose immediately. Choose the place where the danger felt most personal. Tessa had a name, a voice on a recorder, a dog waiting in a clinic. The drivers were strangers. Responsibility did not care. Grant keyed his radio. "Naomi, I'm staying with the lake withdrawal." A pause followed, not long enough for him to hear what the choice meant. "Copy," Naomi said. "Cole has the underground team. We'll update you at first entry." Grant looked toward the distant pumping station, invisible beyond the shoreline trees. For once, trust did not feel like relief. It felt like stepping away from a door he wanted to hold open himself. Damon sent the lightweight sleds onto the ice one at a time. Each carried a long synthetic line, flotation gear, and a single operator. Hannah walked ahead only as far as her verified corridor allowed, planting orange markers at wide intervals. Grant spoke to the truck driver over the radio. "No sudden steering. Maintain idle speed. Leave 50 yards between vehicles." "What if the surface opens?" "Exit through the passenger side. Do not jump toward the trailer. Follow the marked line north." The truck began to move. Its tires rolled slowly over the snow. The towing unit remained stationary until the gap widened. For the first 100 yards, nothing happened. Then the right rear wheel of the towing unit dropped. The sound was not the explosive crack people expected from movies. It was a soft collapse, followed by the wet crunch of layered ice giving way. The vehicle tilted sharply. A sheet of dark water spread around the tire. The driver shouted over the radio. Grant's voice remained level. "Stop! Do not open the driver's door." The man froze. "Shift your weight to the passenger side, slowly." Damon's nearest sled moved into position but stayed beyond the weakened patch. The operator fed the recovery line across the snow. Grant instructed the driver to attach it through the passenger window rather than stepping outside. Hannah knelt beside her radar screen. "The failure is local," she said. "The continuous layer is holding under the front axle." Grant relayed the information. The driver secured the line. Damon's sled applied steady tension while the towing unit moved forward at idle. The sunken wheel dragged through slush, rose against the fractured edge, then climbed back onto the surface. No one cheered. The lake had not allowed room for celebration. The vehicles continued north along Hannah's markers, one at a time, until all three reached shore. Only when the last driver stepped onto solid ground did Grant release the breath he had been holding. Damon stared back across the route. "I thought the warning meant cracks," he said. "So did most people," Hannah replied. "That's why this kind is worse." Grant's radio sounded. Naomi. "First reconnaissance is complete. We found Tessa's tool tether 40 feet beyond the lower landing." Grant pressed the radio closer. "Blood?" "None. Other signs?" "A support brace is down, fresh scrape marks on the floor. Her line continues beyond it." Grant closed his eyes for 1 second. Not relief. Evidence of movement. Evidence she had made it farther. He looked at the empty lake corridor, the orange flag standing bright over invisible weakness. "Status of entry team?" "Cole is resetting ventilation and preparing a deeper advance." Grant turned toward his vehicle. "I'm coming back." When he reached the pumping station, the air outside the hatch smelled of wet concrete blown upward by the ventilation duct. Cole stood beside the entry board, helmet under one arm. Naomi handed Grant a length of narrow black cord, Tessa's tool tether. One end had been cut cleanly, the other was scarred where it had dragged over metal. "No blood," Naomi repeated, "but the support brace fell recently." Russell stood at the edge of the room, staring at the cord. "That brace was beside the old balance junction," he said. "If she passed it, she was heading toward the pressure chamber." Grant looked down into the hatch. The darkness below had not changed, but the search had. Tessa was no longer simply somewhere beneath the station. She had left a line through the structure, and every new sign showed that she had continued deeper after the system began to fail. By late afternoon, the south pumping station had divided into two worlds. Above ground, every table had become a work surface. Old binders lay open beside laptops. Paper diagrams were weighted down with flashlights, radios, and coffee cups gone cold. Extension cords crossed the concrete floor in careful lines. Below ground, the tunnel remained wet, oxygen poor, and only partly mapped. The rescuers could reach the lower landing now, but not much farther. Grant stood at the center of the station with his rescue jacket unzipped, watching information arrive in fragments. The stopped watch remained hidden beneath his sleeve. He had not looked at it once since returning from the lake. Russell Pike had claimed a corner beside the old filing cabinet. He worked with the concentration of a man dismantling his own memory. 3 large binders lay open in front of him. Their paper had yellowed at the edges. Handwritten corrections ran through the printed diagrams in different inks, some decades apart. Russell moved between them and his blue-black notebook, muttering dates and valve numbers under his breath. Miles Corbett sat at the terminal nearby, pulling archived files from county storage. Every few minutes, one of them found something the other had forgotten. That was becoming the pattern. "Here," Russell said at last. He flattened a folded engineering sheet across the table. The drawing showed the southern pumping system as 3 connected structures rather than one. Russell tapped the first symbol with a mechanical pencil. "Intake gate 4. Then the second. Pressure balance valve in the auxiliary corridor. Then a third box farther inland. Emergency overflow pump." Grant leaned closer. "They all have to work together?" "They were designed to." Russell's voice carried the quiet strain of someone who already knew the answer would not be reassuring. "If the intake gate leaks, water keeps feeding the shallow channel. If you close that gate too fast while the pressure valve is restricted, you create a surge through the line." "Water hammer," Miles said. Russell nodded. Grant knew the term from damaged field systems, but not this scale. "What happens here?" Russell traced the pipe toward the tunnel. "Best case, the line ruptures somewhere we can isolate. Worst case, Pressure blows through the balance chamber and floods the lower corridor. Naomi stood on the other side of the table. So if Tessa reached the chamber, she may have found a system she couldn't safely shut down from one location. Correct. Could she hold it stable manually? Russell did not answer immediately. That depends on what failed. The uncertainty settled over the room more heavily than any definitive warning. A simple mechanical failure could be repaired. An unknown relationship between three failing components had to be understood before anyone touched anything. Miles turned from his monitor. I found the maintenance history. No one moved at first. Miles enlarged a scanned report on the screen. The document was 3 years old. Its title was plain enough to be ignored. Recommended replacement, Gate 4 actuator and seal assembly. Below the heading, an engineer had marked the mechanism as degraded but operational. Replacement had been recommended before the next major winter event. Grant read the budget notes attached to the report. The funding had been approved, then reassigned. A spring flood had damaged the northern retaining wall. Emergency repairs had consumed most of the capital reserve. Gate 4 remained in service under a reduced inspection schedule. Who signed the transfer? Grant asked. Elena's predecessor, Miles said. Public Works, County Finance, and the Emergency Board. Was the repair ignored? No, it was deferred. Russell removed his cap. There is a difference on paper. Naomi looked at him. And in steel? Russell stared at the diagram. Not always. Grant expected anger to rise in the room. It would have been easier if it had. A negligent official, a falsified report, someone who had decided money mattered more than safety. Instead, they had a damaged retaining wall that had genuinely needed repair, a gate that had continued to function, and a replacement pushed into a future that kept moving away. Miles opened another file. The flow sensor started drifting 18 months ago. Maintenance cleaned it twice. Was it replaced? Naomi asked. No. Readings returned to tolerance after cleaning. Russell shook his head. That sensor measures actuator demand against expected flow. If the gate says closed and the flow stays within the model's margin, the system reports normal. Even if the seal leaks? Grant asked. If the leak grows slowly enough. The danger had not arrived in one moment. It had accumulated inside acceptable margins. A missing drawing here, a deferred repair there, a sensor that returned to normal after cleaning, an old engineer who could explain the system whenever anyone asked. Grant looked at Russell's notebook. The older man noticed. I should have updated the lower corridor plans. His voice was lower than before. Miles began to say something, but Russell raised a hand. No. I knew the digital set was incomplete. I kept telling myself it was manageable because I was still here. You did file corrections, Miles said. In my notebook. Russell tapped the blue-black cover. A system should not depend on whether one old man answers his phone. The sentence silenced the room. Grant felt its meaning move beyond pipes and maps. Knowledge held by one person was not control. It was fragility disguised as competence. He had spent years believing the opposite. Naomi closed one of the binders. We assign responsibility after we get Tessa out. Russell nodded, but he did not look relieved. Outside, the change at the lake had become visible. The eastern race corridor was empty now. Damon Rusk's crews moved along the shore, driving warning stakes into the snow and carrying sections of fencing away from the ice. Heavy equipment had been relocated to the land-based festival area. Elena Cross stood on a temporary platform near the lakeside pavilion. The mayor had chosen not to hide behind a written statement. Residents, workers, and local business owners gathered in the snow while she spoke through a handheld microphone. Grant listened through the station radio. We have confirmed structural weakness beneath part of the Eastern Lake Corridor, Elena said. All activity on the ice is canceled until an independent assessment is complete. A murmur moved through the crowd. Elena continued before it could build. The winter festival will continue on shore with a reduced program. This decision will affect businesses, workers, and visitors. It is still the only responsible decision. No claim that the situation was under control, no promise that everything would return to normal by morning. Damon stood near the platform in his black work jacket. When reporters approached him afterward, he did not criticize the closure. He directed his employees to move lighting rigs, set up barriers, and help mark the restricted shore. The absence of conflict felt almost strange. Grant had seen emergencies sharpen people into enemies because blame was easier to carry than uncertainty. Here, no one had enough distance from the problem to pretend innocence. The station radio clicked. Cole's voice came from below. Entry control, lower team at the second landing. We found an anchor. Naomi crossed to the communication board. Describe. 12mm static line secured to the west wall. Professional knot. Load tension toward the lower corridor. Russell leaned toward the radio. That would be past the old junction. Cole continued. Personal harness tether attached. No body at the anchor. Line continues beyond the flooded section. Grant pictured Tessa moving through the dark, fixing an anchor before committing herself farther into the system. Not reckless. Not unprepared. Still alone. How deep is the water? Naomi asked. Chest level at the low point. Current is mild, but increases every time the pump cycle changes. And atmosphere? Oxygen fluctuates between 19.1 and 17.8. Ventilation improves it, then the next cycle draws air toward the chamber. Cole's voice remained controlled. We cannot advance safely until we understand the cycle. Russell moved to the system console. The emergency pump is not running. Miles checked the display. Automatic mode is inactive. Then something else is pulling pressure. The room changed again, not panic, orientation. Russell began comparing the times from Cole's gas meter with the station's operating log. Miles pulled the recorder file from Tessa's backpack onto the main speakers. Wind filled the station, then the dull pulse of machinery. They listened once, twice. On the third replay, Grant noticed Russell counting under his breath. The sound sequence was uneven. A low motor hum, a metallic knock, silence, then two short warning tones. Russell frowned. That isn't the main intake chamber. Miles replayed it. What makes you sure? The warning pitch. Main gate panel uses a continuous alarm. Auxiliary balance panel uses two short tones before a pressure reset. Grant turned toward him. So Tessa recorded this near the balance chamber? Possibly. Possibly is not enough. No, Russell said. It isn't. The clinic called before they could continue. Mira's voice came over Naomi's phone. Briar is awake and able to stand briefly. She is not cleared for work. Grant almost smiled at the order of that sentence. Mira knew exactly what they would ask. We need to replay an audio file near her, Naomi said. Nothing physical. A pause. Send Miles. One person, no crowd. Miles looked surprised. Why me? Because you know the equipment sounds, Russell said. And because Briar has already seen Grant leave, Naomi added. We do not need to turn her recovery room into an operations center. Miles took the recorder and drove to the clinic. The rest of them stayed at the station, waiting for a dog to react to a sound without pretending the reaction would explain engineering. Grant disliked the helplessness of that wait. He walked to the open hatch and listened to the blower pushing air down the duct. Beneath it came the faintest vibration of machinery, too low to identify. Naomi joined him. You made the right choice on the lake, she said. Grant kept his eyes on the dark stairwell. That doesn't make this easier. It isn't supposed to. She could be down there keeping something open while we compare old paperwork. Or she could be alive because we did not send an unprotected team into a bad atmosphere. Grant said nothing. Naomi leaned one shoulder against the wall. You keep treating uncertainty like a delay you can overpower. And you treat it like a reason to wait. No, her voice stayed calm. I treat it like part of the scene. Grant looked at her then. There was no accusation in her face, only the expectation that he would understand. His radio sounded before he could answer. Miles. I'm at the clinic, playing the file now. Static carried the motor noise into the station. Grant heard the metallic knock, then the two short tones. A bark broke through the speaker, one sharp sound. Mira said something in the background. Miles replayed the sequence. The motor hum began again. Briar remained silent through the machinery. At the two warning tones, she tried to turn toward the clinic exit. Mira stopped the recorder. That is enough, she said firmly. Miles's breathing came across the line. She recognizes the alarm. Russell stepped closer to the radio. Ask Mira whether Briar moved on the motor sound or the tones. She says only the tones. Russell closed his eyes. When he opened them, the uncertainty in his face had changed shape. Tessa trained her to withdraw from the auxiliary chamber alarm, he said. Maintenance crews use that signal before pressure equalization. Naomi looked toward the hatch. So the recording was made near the balance chamber? Yes. And Tessa reached it. Russell nodded. The conclusion did not rescue her. It made her situation more dangerous. If Tessa had reached the auxiliary chamber and remained there, she was not lost in the tunnel. She had likely found a mechanical condition that required her presence. Miles returned to the station 20 minutes later with the recorder, but without Briar. Mira had refused to move the dog. He placed the device beside Russell's notebook. There's another detail, Miles said. When the tones played, Briar didn't just react. She turned toward the door and lowered her body. Return to safe point posture, Russell said. Grant remembered Briar behind the windbreak, curled around the backpack. Tessa had heard the alarm. She had sent the dog away from it. The decision had not been about protecting the data alone. It had been about keeping Briar out of the chamber. Cole's voice came through the underground line again. Entry control. We advanced to the edge of the flooded section. Tessa's tether is still under tension. Naomi took the radio. Any visual? Negative, but the line is not snagged loose. Something beyond the turn is holding it. Russell spread the old diagram flat. The tether's direction, the sound recording, the warning tones, the changing airflow, all of it pointed to the same room. The pressure chamber. Grant stared at the symbol on the plan. She made it there, he said. Russell placed one finger on the balance valve. If the gate seal is leaking and the pump cycle is unstable, she may be manually maintaining the pressure path. For how long? I don't know. What happens if she stops? Russell looked at Naomi before answering. The balance valve could close. Pressure would rise through the intake line. The lower corridor could flood before the controls upstairs register the change. The room went silent. Until that moment, the rescue had been framed around reaching Tessa before the tunnel killed her. Now the problem reversed itself. Tessa might still be alive because she was preventing the tunnel from becoming more dangerous. She was not waiting passively to be found. She was part of the system holding. Grant looked around the station. Russell with his incomplete drawings, Miles with the missed call, Elena taking responsibility in public, Damon moving equipment instead of arguing, Cole refusing to advance beyond safe limits, Naomi holding the entire operation together without pretending certainty. There was no villain to confront, only a chain of people, decisions, aging parts, and unshared knowledge that had finally reached the same breaking point. Grant turned to Naomi. "We stopped treating this as a missing person search." She nodded. "It is now a technical rescue with an active operator inside." Russell pulled another sheet from the binder. "To get her out, we have to stabilize all 3 components before anyone removes her from that chamber." Grant looked at the old diagram again. Gate 4, the pressure balance valve, the emergency overflow pump. 3 systems, 3 locations, 1 person below ground who might be keeping them from failing together. Outside, the winter sun began to lower over Clearhaven. The lake still shone white, but no one in the station mistook brightness for safety anymore. 36 hours after Grant found Briar behind the windbreak, the dog was standing again. Not well, not for long, but standing. Dr. Mira Ellison watched from beside the treatment table as Briar placed weight carefully through her bandaged front paw. The clinic had quieted overnight. Most of the radios and maps had been moved to the south pumping station, leaving behind the soft hum of medical equipment and the faint chemical smell of disinfectant. Briar wore a clean burgundy thermal vest. The silver strips along its sides caught the morning light whenever she shifted. Her movements were slow, controlled, and visibly expensive. Each step required thought. Mira held a leash loosely in one hand. 3 minutes, she said. Then she lies down. Grant stood near the door with Tessa's red backpack over one shoulder. He had returned to collect the steel master key and the paper maps Russell needed for the next descent. He had not expected Briar to be awake. The dog saw the pack before she saw him. Her head lifted. The notched left ear angled forward. She stepped away from the padded mat. Mira shortened the leash. "No," Briar continued. Grant lowered the backpack. "Hold." The command stopped her. For 2 breaths, Briar remained completely still. Grant felt the room tighten around that pause. The same word had calmed her the previous day. It had allowed him to leave while she guarded the bag from the clinic bed. Now her amber eyes moved from the backpack to his face. Then Briar took another step. Mira looked at Grant. "She heard you." "I know." Briar was not confused. She was not ignoring him out of fear or pain. She approached the bag with the slow certainty of an animal following the logic of a task. Grant set it on the floor. Briar touched her nose to the side pocket, then to his bare hand. After that, she moved beside his leg rather than returning to the mat. Mira exhaled through her nose. "The order changed when you picked up the object." Grant looked down at the dog. "Tessa told her to guard it at a safe point. And now the safe point is moving." Briar leaned slightly toward the door. The realization unsettled Grant more than outright disobedience would have. He had spent years treating commands as fixed things, clear instructions, defined positions. A person either followed them or did not. Briar understood something more flexible. The purpose of the order mattered more than its exact location. "She cannot enter the station," Mira said. "I wasn't going to take her underground." "She cannot run. She cannot stand on frozen concrete for an hour. She cannot pull a line, climb stairs, or prove how loyal she is." Grant met Mira's gaze. "What can she do?" Mira glanced at Briar, then at the backpack. "She can ride to the exterior command post. She can lie on an insulated mat. She can remain under veterinary observation. The moment her breathing changes or that paw swells, she comes back." Grant nodded. Mira raised one finger. "And no one turns her presence into a rescue strategy." That was the condition Grant understood best. Briar would not be brought because the team needed a miracle from a dog. She would be brought because the task she had guarded was moving. and forcing her to remain behind might create more stress than controlled transport. Mira fitted padded boots over Briar's injured paws and secured the clean vest around her chest. When Grant lifted the backpack again, Briar followed. This time he did not repeat the command. The South Pumping Station had grown into a compact operations base. A heated command tent stood near the main building. Power cables ran to generators parked beyond the snowbank. Hannah Keene monitored lake temperatures and water levels from a mobile station on the shore. Russell and Miles occupied the control room with paper diagrams spread across every available surface. Inside the main bay, Cole Haskett was preparing the entry team. A fourth rescuer stood beside him, checking a medical pack. Her name was Lena Ortiz, a county paramedic trained in confined space extraction. She was in her early 40s, compact and steady, with dark hair braided beneath a close-fitting cap. Lena spoke little while working, but every movement had a defined purpose. She checked splints, thermal wraps, intravenous supplies, and the narrow rescue litter twice before sealing the pack. Naomi was already in a red dry suit, reviewing the entry board. Grant placed Tessa's backpack beside Russell. The older engineer immediately removed the master key and unfolded the marked system plan. Briar was settled in the command tent on a thick insulated mat near the ventilation monitor. Mira remained beside her. Cole handed Grant a breathing harness.
Full inspection. We checked the same equipment yesterday. We are checking it today.
Grant looked toward the open access door. The ventilation duct disappeared down the stairs. Tessa had been beneath them for more than a day and a half. Cole held out the harness without expression. Grant took it. They checked the cylinder pressure, face seal, backup light, personal gas detector, main line, secondary tether, knife, gloves, and communication lead. Cole made him repeat the withdrawal procedure. Loss of primary communication? Cole asked. Stop movement. Confirm mechanical signal. Without unless life contact is established. Atmospheric alarm? Immediate retreat to last verified zone. Line failure? Secondary tether and partner contact. Cole nodded. Only then did he allow Grant to move toward the hatch. The delay frustrated him, but frustration no longer felt like proof that the procedure was wrong. Before entering, Grant looked through the open station door toward the command tent. Briar lay on the mat with her head raised. The red backpack rested beside Russell inside the control room, no longer beneath her paw. She watched Grant instead. For the first time since he had found her, the object was not the center of her attention. The responsibility had moved again. Cole descended first, followed by Naomi, Lena, and Grant. Forced air pushed down the stairwell, carrying the smell of wet steel and mineral water upward. Their helmet lamps cut narrow paths through the concrete darkness. At the lower landing, water covered the floor. It reached Grant's knees at first, then rose to his waist as the corridor sloped toward the lake. The cold pressed through the protective suit as a deep, constant weight. Tessa's safety line ran along the west wall. Every 20 feet, Cole checked the air and called the readings to the surface. Oxygen remained acceptable under ventilation, but the numbers shifted with each distant mechanical cycle. The corridor tightened near the fallen support brace. A steel frame had collapsed diagonally across the passage, leaving a narrow opening above the water. Fresh scrape marks scored the floor where something heavy had been dragged beneath it. Grant touched the damaged metal. "Tessa passed this?" Naomi pointed to the line. "It continues." They moved through, one at a time. Beyond the brace, the water deepened to Grant's ribs. A low current pressed against their legs, stronger every time the machinery pulsed somewhere ahead. Lena paused to check the water temperature. "We limit exposure," she said. "No unnecessary stop." Grant almost laughed at the impossibility of unnecessary delay down there. Then the mechanical signal came. A low hum traveled through the walls,
Metal knocked once. 2 short warning tones sounded beyond the next turn. Grant knew the sequence now.
Auxiliary pressure reset. He pictured Briar in the command tent hearing the same alarm. Cole raised a closed fist. The team stopped. The gas meter dipped, then stabilized as the ventilation system compensated. When Cole signaled forward, they continued. Tessa's line disappeared beneath a partly open maintenance door. The opening was barely wide enough for one person with equipment. Rust marked the lower hinge. On the other side, Grant heard breathing. Not machinery. Human breathing.
"Tessa!" Naomi called. A pause. Then a woman's voice answered, thin but controlled. "Do not touch the valve." Grant shut his eyes for half a second. Alive. Cole entered first. The pressure chamber was smaller than Grant had imagined. Pipes crowded the walls. Condensation ran over old gauges and dripped from the ceiling. A wheel mechanism occupied the center, connected to a horizontal balance valve. Tessa Marlowe sat against the base of the assembly. Her teal softshell jacket was dark with water. Brown hair had come loose from its braid and clung to her pale face. A yellow helmet lay on its side nearby, the lamp still glowing weakly. A fallen steel support pinned her right lower leg against the floor. Her left hand rested on a narrow locking pin beside the valve's broken ratchet mechanism. A pry bar had been wedged through the gear housing as a temporary brace. Each time pressure shifted through the pipes, the bar moved by a fraction. Tessa's fingers corrected it. Again. Again. She looked at Grant without recognition at first. Then her eyes focused on the markings of his rescue suit. "How long?" she asked. "Since you went in?" "Since the last pressure rise." Russell's voice came through the field telephone line. "Gauge cycle was 6 minutes ago." Tessa nodded faintly. "Then we have 4. Lena moved toward her injured leg. Tessa tightened her grip on the pin. "Not until someone takes this." Grant crouched beside the mechanism. "Tell me what it does." "The ratchet failed. The valve wants to return closed. The pry bar carries most of the load, but the retaining pin walks out when pressure rises. You've been pushing it back. Every cycle." Grant examined the assembly. She was not holding the valve open by force. That would have been impossible for even a few minutes. She was maintaining the smallest component in a temporary mechanical solution. A few inches of steel. A task narrow enough to survive, important enough that she could not leave. "How long have you been pinned?" Lena asked. Tessa glanced at the support across her leg. "Since yesterday morning." Lena's expression did not change, but her hands became faster. She checked circulation above and below the injury, then began placing thermal insulation around Tessa's torso. Cole assessed the fallen brace. "We can lift it with the compact ram, but movement may disturb the valve frame." "It will," Tessa said. Grant positioned himself beside the pin. "I'll take it." Tessa looked at his hand. "Do you understand the cycle?" "Explain it." Pressure rises after the motor tone. The pin shifts outward. Do not push before it moves, or you can bind the ratchet. Keep it flush with the housing, not deeper. Grant placed his thumb against the steel. Tessa did not release it. Their hands remained side by side on the pin. "You are Grant Sutter," she said. It was not a question. "How do you know?" "Briar's tracker logged your county vehicle before the battery died." Even exhausted, Tessa had found room for precision. "She's alive," Grant said. The tension in Tessa's face altered. Not much. Enough. "Condition?" "Recovering. Mira brought her to the command post." Tessa closed her eyes. The next motor tone sounded. The pin shifted. Tessa pressed it flush, then looked at Grant. Your turn. She lifted her hand away. For a moment, the entire system seemed to narrow under the pressure beneath Grant's thumb. The pin moved against him with surprising delicacy.
There was no dramatic force, only a persistent outward crawl. Grant held it level. Stable, he said. Tessa let her arm fall across her chest. It was the first time in more than a day that she was no longer physically maintaining the system. Lena began stabilizing the injured leg. Naomi secured Tessa's shoulders and checked the placement of the rescue litter. Cole prepared the lifting ram beneath the steel support. Grant remained at the valve. He had taken over the task, but he did not make it his alone. Russell, he said into the field line, talk me through every pressure cycle. The older engineer answered immediately. Current differential is climbing slowly. Next movement in approximately 3 minutes. Keep the pin flush. Do not overcorrect. Grant looked at the gauge. Miles, verify upstairs. Miles responded from the control room. Confirmed. Gate demand unchanged. Flow reading rising within the leak margin. Naomi glanced toward Grant. Months earlier, perhaps even 2 days earlier, he would have treated the pin as his burden. He would have trusted his own hand more than the voices above. Now every instruction passed through the line. Every reading was repeated. Every decision had witnesses. Cole activated the ram. The fallen support rose less than an inch. Tessa gasped, but did not cry out. Lena slid a stabilizing block beneath the beam. Again, she said. The ram lifted farther. Naomi pulled Tessa's leg free while Lena guided it onto a vacuum splint. The limb was swollen and discolored, but circulation remained present. The motor hum began. Cycle, Russell warned. Grant felt the pin move. He waited until the exact moment Tessa had described, then pressed it back to level. Flush, he reported. A sharp alarm sounded through the chamber. Above ground, the telephone line crackled, then went silent. Russell? No response. Grant tapped the handset. Nothing. Water had been seeping from a junction box near the lower corridor. The connection had finally failed. Cole checked the mechanical signal line. Surface still has tether contact. Naomi looked toward the chamber door. We switched to backup. Outside, Miles activated the visual signal system. A waterproof lamp mounted in the corridor blinked twice. Communication failure acknowledged. Then the low warning tone sounded again. Far above them, near the ventilation shaft, Briar heard the alarm. Her bark traveled faintly through the metal duct. One sharp call. Grant looked upward. The sound did not tell him how to operate the valve. It did not replace Russell's readings or restore the damaged line. But it confirmed that the alarm had reached the upper station at the same moment. The cycle was changing. Miles saw the pressure shift on the control panel. Briar's bark gave him an immediate physical confirmation that the chamber alarm had activated below. He pulled the mechanical signal cord 3 times. 3 tugs reached Cole's line. Pressure increase. Grant braced his hand at the pin. It moved. He corrected it. The chamber held. Lena secured Tessa fully onto the narrow litter. The steel support was lowered onto blocks away from the valve frame. We can move her, Lena said. Tessa shook her head. Not yet. Grant understood before she explained. Removing her body from the chamber did not solve the system failure. The pry bar still held the broken ratchet. The emergency pump was not yet operating. Gate 4 continued leaking. Cole looked at Grant. We have the patient free. We do not have a safe withdrawal. Tessa turned her head toward the valve. If the pin releases while we are in the lower corridor, the balance valve closes. Pressure will rise before the surface controls show the full change. Naomi keyed the backup signal line, sending the message upward through coded pulls.
Russell's reply came back slowly. Remain in place.
Prepare system sequence.
Grant kept his thumb against the pin. Beside him, Tessa lay strapped to the litter, no longer trapped by the steel beam, but still unable to leave the room she had fought to stabilize. Far above, Briar settled near the ventilation shaft after the alarm stopped. Her head remained raised, listening. The rescue team had reached Tessa. They had freed her leg, but reaching someone and bringing her home were not the same task. The chamber was still holding only because a broken mechanism, a temporary pry bar, and Grant's hand remained in exactly the right position.
The pressure chamber had become quieter after the telephone line failed. Not silent. The old system still carried sound through every surface, water moving behind steel, the distant pulse of the intake motor, the faint metallic complaint of the pry bar inside the damaged ratchet. But without Russell's voice coming through the field handset, the room felt cut away from the rest of Clearhaven. Grant kept his thumb against the retaining pin. The steel pressed outward in small, steady movements. Nothing about it felt dramatic. That was what made it dangerous. A sudden force would have demanded attention. This pressure was patient. Beside him, Tessa lay secured to the narrow rescue litter, her injured leg immobilized inside a vacuum splint. Lena Ortiz monitored her pulse and breathing while adding another thermal layer around her shoulders. Tessa's face had gone pale beneath the streaks of oil and condensation. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on the valve assembly. "You cannot keep that position through the full sequence," she said. Grant did not look away from the pin. "I know. You will lose fine control before you lose strength." "I know that too." "Then put me back." Lena immediately shook her head. "Not happening." Tessa ignored her and looked at Grant. "I know the movement. I held it this long. You also have a crushed leg and a core temperature that is still too low. The valve does not care." "No," Grant said, "but the rest of us do." For a moment, anger sharpened Tessa's expression. It was not the anger of a helpless patient. It was the frustration of a capable person whose body had become the least reliable part of her own plan. Grant recognized it. He had seen the same look in mirrors after injury, after retirement, after every moment when control had passed to someone else before he was ready to release it. The mechanical signal cord moved against Cole's glove. 3 pulls. A pause. 2 pulls. Cole read the code aloud. "Surface acknowledges communication failure. Preparing system sequence." Naomi crouched beside the temporary line board. "Russell will send each stage mechanically. No action until confirmed twice." Grant nodded. Tessa watched the cord. "You built redundancy." Cole did. Cole was already examining the pry bar and the broken ratchet housing. His helmet light moved across the metal, pausing at the narrow gap where the retaining pin sat. "The handhold is temporary," he said. "But the pin does not need a hand. It needs controlled inward pressure." Naomi looked at him. "Can you rig it?" "With what we brought, yes. Whether it holds through a pressure change is another question." Grant shifted his wrist as the pin crept outward again. "How long?" 5 minutes if no fitting fights me." Tessa gave a weak, humorless breath. "Every fitting in this room has been fighting someone since 1987. Cole opened a compact hardware pouch. He selected a short steel hook, a rescue strap, 2 locking carabiners, and a small mechanical haul device normally used to tension lines in narrow spaces. Naomi helped him identify 2 possible anchor points on the valve frame. Grant watched the work while keeping pressure on the pin. In the past, he would have measured every movement, judged each knot, and prepared to take over if the rig looked imperfect. Now he asked only one question. "What do you need from me?" "Keep the pin level," Cole said. "Nothing else."
That answer should have been easy. It was not. Above ground, Miles Corbett stood at the emergency pump controls with Russell beside him. The old control room had become a web of temporary connections. The telephone circuit to the tunnel was dead, so Russell had placed one hand on the mechanical signal line and the other over a gauge marked in fading black numbers. Hannah's voice came through the radio from the lakeshore. "Channel level is holding."
"Under ice flow, still moving east." Russell answered, "We are beginning the overflow sequence." Miles pressed the pump start control. A relay clicked. Nothing else happened. He tried again. The panel lights dimmed. A warning indicator flashed amber. "Overload," Miles said. Russell looked toward the power readout. "The heater circuit and blowers are pulling too much from the old feed. We cannot cut ventilation." "No." Miles reached for the transfer switch. The standby generator outside should have taken the load automatically. It did not. He looked through the control room window. Beyond the snowbank, the portable generator sat on its trailer, its status lamp dark. "Starter fault." Russell lifted the radio. "Damon, we need the mobile generator at the south station. Now." Damon's answer arrived beneath engine noise. "Already moving." On the shore road, a utility tractor pulled a second generator from the festival grounds. Damon drove ahead on a lightweight sled, clearing the route and waving workers away from the cables crossing the snow. The festival had become almost unrecognizable. The race banners were gone from the ice. Food stalls and lighting frames had been moved onto the lakeside field. Volunteers who had expected to direct visitors now carried barriers and fuel cans. No one asked whether this was still their responsibility. It had become their responsibility because they were there. Inside the pressure chamber, Cole completed the first anchor. He looped the rescue strap around a reinforced section of pipe support, connected the haul device, and ran the short hook toward the retaining pin. Naomi tested the angle. "Too much lateral pull." Cole adjusted the upper carabiner. "Now?" "Closer." Tessa raised her head slightly. "The force has to follow the pin axis. If you pull downward, it will score the housing." Grant looked at Cole. "You heard her." "I did." There was no irritation in Cole's reply. He repositioned the line again. The pin moved beneath Grant's thumb. He corrected it. A deep vibration passed through the floor. Lena checked Tessa's pulse. "Pressure cycle?" Tessa listened. "No. Pump demand from above." Grant felt the stopped watch beneath the cuff of his suit. For years, that watch had marked the moment a team lost options because he had kept too much inside his own head. He had worn it as punishment, believing memory required pain to remain useful. Now a mechanical line connected the chamber to Russell. A radio linked Russell to Hannah. Damon was bringing power. Miles stood at the controls. Cole was building the restraint. Naomi verified the load. Lena kept Tessa alive. No single person knew enough to finish the work. That was not weakness. It was the design. The signal cord moved. One pull, then one again. Russell's code for delay. Grant looked toward the chamber door. "What happened?" Cole checked the line response and sent back acknowledgement. They waited. The pin kept pressing outward. The temporary rig was nearly ready, but not loaded. Tessa spoke through clenched teeth. "If power does not come back, the overflow pump stays off." "We know. Then the gate cannot close." "We know that too, and eventually you will have to choose between leaving me or losing the corridor." Grant finally looked at her. "No." Tessa's eyes hardened. "That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting." "You cannot negotiate with hydraulic pressure. I am not negotiating with the pressure." He glanced at Cole, Naomi, and the mechanical line leading upward. I am refusing the assumption that one person has to remain here for everyone else to leave. Tessa stared at him. The chamber seemed to hold that sentence between them. Then, faintly through the concrete, an engine started above. The vibration was rough at first, then steadied. Damon's generator. Miles transferred the pump circuit. Lights brightened in the upper station. The overflow control panel came alive. Hannah watched the channel gauge on the shore. "Power confirmed," she said. "No change in level yet." Russell gripped the signal cord. He sent the sequence downward. 2 pulls, pause. 2 pulls, begin pump. Miles pressed the control. This time, a heavy motor answered. The overflow pump turned slowly, resisting years of disuse. Its first rotation sounded like metal dragging over stone. Then the rhythm smoothed. Water began moving out of the auxiliary channel. In the chamber, the pipe beneath Grant's hand shuddered. The pin pushed outward harder. "Now," Cole said. He tensioned the temporary rig. The hook settled against the pin head, transferring pressure into the anchored line. Grant did not remove his thumb immediately. "Load is taking," Naomi said. "Half tension," Cole replied. Tessa watched the pin. "Wait for the next pulse." The motor tone sounded. A warning knock followed. The pin moved. The rig stretched by less than an inch, then held. Grant slowly reduced the pressure of his hand. The pin remained flush. For the first time since entering the chamber, nothing depended solely on his body. He lifted his thumb away. Tessa exhaled. Not relief. Recognition. The mechanical signal cord moved again. Russell's next instruction. Open balance valve 1 increment. Cole and Naomi moved to the wheel assembly. Grant took position beside the rig, monitoring the pin. The valve resisted. Cole applied steady torque. The wheel turned a fraction. The pressure gauge trembled. Above, Russell watched the differential fall. "Hold," he told Miles. Miles relayed the stage through the signal cord. Hannah reported a slight drop in the shallow channel. The sequence continued. Pump running. Balance valve opened 1 controlled step at a time. Pressure reduced before the intake gate moved. When the difference reached Russell's target, Miles began closing gate 4 remotely. Not fully. 1 measured increment. The old actuator groaned through the station. Under the lake, water flow narrowed. Hannah watched the temperature probes. "Current declining at the east corridor." Russell sent the next mechanical command. In the chamber, Naomi counted the turns. Grant repeated each count aloud. Cole verified the temporary anchor after every pressure change. Lena stayed beside Tessa, who no longer tried to direct every movement. Her eyes followed the process, but her hands remained beneath the thermal blanket. For a few minutes, the operation found a rhythm. Then the upper carabiner shifted. The sound was small, a sharp scrape of metal against the anchor frame. Cole saw it first. "Secondary point." The temporary line angled downward. The retaining pin moved halfway out. Grant caught it with his palm. Naomi grabbed the mechanical haul device to keep it from releasing. Tessa tried to rise. Lena held her down. Cole did not improvise wildly. He reached for the second anchor he had already installed before loading the system. The backup had seemed excessive 5 minutes earlier. Now it was the only reason the rig did not fail completely. He clipped the transfer line, took in slack, and shifted the load. "Primary unloaded," he said. Naomi reset the first connection. Grant held the pin level. No one shouted. No one pretended the failure had not been dangerous. They had expected movement and prepared somewhere else for the force to go. When the second anchor took the load, Grant removed his hand again. The pin remained seated. Tessa looked at Cole. "You planned for that." "I planned for something." A tired smile crossed her face and vanished.
The next signal arrived, Gate 4 at 75%. Hannah reported the current beneath the ice had dropped further. The water level in the auxiliary channel continued falling.
Russell waited until every gauge stabilized before sending the final command. Close gate to sealing position. Miles placed both hands on the control. The actuator advanced slowly. At first, the flow reading did not change. Then it fell. A number that had stayed within the system's tolerated leak margin for years began descending toward zero. Russell watched without blinking. "Seal contact," he said. Hannah confirmed from the shore. Under ice flow nearly stopped. The pressure differential leveled. Only then did Russell authorize the balance valve to close. Cole and Naomi reversed the wheel in small increments. Grant watched the retaining pin, but the load on it diminished with each turn. The pry bar stopped trembling. The temporary rig slackened. For the first time since Tessa entered the chamber, the broken ratchet no longer fought to close under uncontrolled pressure. Cole removed the hook from the retaining pin. The steel remained in place. "System stable," Russell said through the restored portable radio they had lowered along a dry backup route. His voice reached the chamber faintly but clearly. No one celebrated. Grant looked at Tessa. "We can leave now." This time she did not argue. The extraction began with the same discipline as the entry. Lena checked the splint and Tessa's circulation. Naomi secured the thermal cover around the litter. Cole attached the main haul line and a secondary safety tether. Grant did not lift Tessa alone. At the first narrow doorway, all 4 rescuers repositioned the litter by inches. At the fallen brace, the surface team took tension while Cole guided the leading edge through the opening. At each anchor point, the litter stopped, transferred, and moved again. No single dramatic effort carried Tessa out. The work belonged to every hand on every line. The water remained high in the lower corridor, but the current had weakened. Ventilation held the oxygen level within the safe operating range. The team moved slowly enough to protect Tessa and quickly enough to limit cold exposure. When they reached the final stairwell, daylight appeared above them. Not a beam cutting through darkness, a broad white brightness reflected from the snow outside. The surface crew pulled in rhythm. 1 count, 2, hold, transfer, again. The litter rose over the threshold. Cold air rushed into the station bay. Beyond the open doors, the late afternoon sun shone across the snowbanks and the silent lake. Briar was already standing. Mira held the leash loosely but did not release it. The dog wore padded boots and the burgundy vest. Her body leaned forward, every part of her focused on the litter. Tessa turned her head. "Briar." The dog stepped once, then stopped. She did not pull against Mira. She waited. Grant emerged behind the litter, carrying the red backpack. Its straps were damp from the tunnel air, but the pack remained closed. Briar's eyes moved from Tessa to the bag and back again. Tessa extended one hand over the edge of the thermal cover. Briar approached slowly. She touched her nose to the back of Tessa's hand. The contact lasted longer than it had with Grant beside the windbreak. Tessa closed her fingers lightly against the dog's muzzle. Then she looked at the backpack. "Clear." Briar's ears shifted. She turned toward the bag, touched it once with her nose, and stepped away. The task was over, not abandoned, completed. Briar moved between the litter and Grant, close enough that her shoulder brushed his leg. For the first time, she did not place herself over the backpack. She placed herself between the people who had carried its responsibility. Behind them, the south pumping station continued to run. The overflow pump slowed. Gate 4 held. The pressure chamber remained stable. No one had stayed below to make that possible. By the time Tessa Marlowe left the hospital, Clearhaven Lake had frozen hard again. That did not make it safe. Red barriers remained along the eastern shore, their bright fabric visible through the bare trees. Warning stakes stood where festival fencing had once marked the race corridor. Beneath the white surface, sensors now recorded temperature and current every 15 minutes. The lake looked exactly as it had before the failure. Clearhaven no longer accepted appearance as proof. Tessa returned in a county vehicle on a gray afternoon 3 weeks after the rescue. Her right leg was fitted with a rigid brace beneath loose charcoal trousers, and a black aluminum cane rested across her lap. The nerve damage below her knee had left patches of numbness, interrupted by sudden, burning pain. Doctors expected improvement, but none of them had promised how much. Briar waited inside Mira Ellison's clinic. The shepherd's recovery had been less complicated, though not faster than she believed it should be. The cold injuries on her pads had healed without tissue loss, but Mira had allowed only short indoor walks and simple balance exercises. No field work, no stairs, no technical harness. Briar objected to these restrictions by staring at doors. Mira considered that preferable to watching her collapse. When Tessa entered the rehabilitation room, Briar did not rush toward her. The dog stood from the padded mat, tested her bandaged front paw, and crossed the floor in a measured line. Her burgundy vest had been replaced by a plain black training harness with no equipment attached. Tessa lowered herself carefully onto a bench. Briar stopped in front of her. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Tessa extended the back of her hand. Briar touched it with her nose. The gesture was familiar, but the pause before it was not. Tessa had once considered the contact the beginning of an instruction. Now it felt like confirmation that both of them had returned altered. "Easy work," Mira said from the doorway. Tessa looked up. "I know." "No, you know how to say that." Mira crossed her arms. "I need you to know how to do it." Tessa gave a tired smile. Briar sat beside her braced leg without being told. That was the first exercise Mira allowed them. Not command response, not object retrieval. Remaining together without turning recovery into a mission. The official investigation concluded the following week. The report was 214 pages long and contained no dramatic revelation. Gate 4 had failed because the actuator assembly was worn, the seal had degraded, and the metal around the ratchet mechanism showed fatigue consistent with age and repeated load. The flow sensor had drifted gradually. Cleaning had returned its readings to the accepted range without revealing the growing leak. Maintenance recommendations had been recorded, but not tracked across budget cycles. The lower pressure corridor had never been fully added to the digital plans. No one had sabotaged the system. No one had falsified a report. No single decision had created the emergency. That made the conclusions harder to dismiss and harder to punish. Elena Cross released the entire report publicly. She stood in the town hall beneath fluorescent lights, not on a festival stage, and answered questions for nearly 2 hours. She did not blame the previous administration for redirecting funds after the flood. She also did not use the flood as an excuse. "The decisions made then addressed a real emergency," Elena said. "Our failure was allowing one deferred repair to disappear into the next year, and then the next." Responsibility does not vanish because every individual choice seemed reasonable at the time. The town approved replacement of the intake system, an independent inspection of the lake infrastructure, and a new rule requiring technical warnings to remain open until a named official closed them with written evidence. Elena insisted that the final rule apply to her office as well. Russell Pike postponed his retirement. Not indefinitely, 6 months. He cleared an unused room in the water department and began transferring 30 years of handwritten notes into the official system. His blue-black notebook remained beside the keyboard, but it was no longer the only place where the lower corridors existed. Every diagram required another person to review it,
Every correction carried a date, a source, and a second signature. Russell complained about the process daily. He also arrived before everyone else. Miles Corbett asked to be assigned to the project.
His mistake had been included in the report. He had interpreted Tessa's broken call as a field update rather than an emergency warning. The investigators also documented that the county had no two-way confirmation rule for failed communications. Miles had expected suspension. Instead, Elena asked him to help build the procedure he had needed that morning. Under the new system, an unclear emergency call could not simply be logged. The receiver had to contact a second operator, attempt alternate channels, and escalate the warning if the caller could not be reached. Miles printed the checklist and taped it beside every utility phone. On the first copy, he wrote in black marker, "Silence is not confirmation." Damon Rusk donated 2 lightweight recovery sleds and a portable generator to the county's new winter safety unit. He also required every business using vehicles on the lake to send 1 employee to pre-season safety training. A few owners complained about the cost. Damon reminded them that replacing a truck was more expensive than attending a class. The festival resumed on shore in a reduced form. There was no race. Instead, the open field near the pavilion held food stalls, local music, equipment demonstrations, and a fenced viewing area facing the lake. People came anyway. Perhaps fewer than expected. Enough. Clearhaven did not turn the rescue into a celebration of heroism. There were no large banners with Grant's name, no bronze plaque for Tessa, and no ceremonial vest placed on Briar. The town had nearly suffered because too much knowledge and responsibility had gathered around individuals. Building another legend around one person would have taught the wrong lesson. Grant understood that before anyone said it aloud. His own changes were less visible than the barriers along the shore. At the emergency management office, he began distributing complete response plans instead of shortened versions. Backup routes were no longer kept in the folder on his desk until he considered them necessary. Naomi received the same information he did. Cole reviewed confined space procedures before winter. Hannah had direct access to the lake monitoring feed. Grant also added a new section to every emergency plan: assumptions requiring verification. The first time Naomi saw it, she looked at him for several seconds. "You made a list of things you might be wrong about." "I made a list of things we have not proved." That must have hurt. It remains uncomfortable. She smiled and signed the review page. Grant still disliked having his decisions challenged. He still arrived early, checked equipment twice, and noticed missing details before most people entered the room. Change had not made him less exacting. It had made his exactness available to others. One evening he opened the drawer where he kept his spare batteries and found the stopped watch beside them. He had removed it before entering the hospital after the rescue and had not put it back on. The hands still marked 2:17. For years, Grant had believed wearing it kept him accountable. Without the weight around his wrist, he expected to feel careless or disloyal to the people affected by his old mistake. He felt neither. Memory remained. The punishment had been optional. Grant closed the drawer without throwing the watch away. Leaving it there was enough. The Clearhaven Winter Safety Group held its first training session 5 weeks after the rescue. The new facility occupied a renovated storage building beside the county response station. One room contained maps and monitoring screens. Another held technical rescue equipment. A third had rubber flooring, low platforms, scent boxes, and movable barriers for canine work. Tessa led the session from a chair near the training floor. She no longer needed the rigid leg brace, but she still used the black cane. A waterproof orange marker was clipped to her sweater, its cracked barrel held together with clear tape. Russell and Miles stood beside the system display. Hannah had brought sample ice cores sealed in clear tubes. Cole demonstrated line redundancy at the far wall. Naomi observed from the doorway, with her silver whistle hanging against her rescue jacket. Grant sat at the table rather than standing at the front. That was deliberate. Briar had been cleared for 10 minutes of light training. The dog entered, wearing her simple black harness. Her steps were even now, though Mira watched from the edge of the room with the expression of someone prepared to end the exercise at the first sign of strain. The red backpack sat on a low wooden chair. No one had placed it there as a test of obedience. Tessa had requested it. The pack had been cleaned, but not restored. Scratches marked one side. A dark water stain remained near the base. The reflective strip still carried Tessa's name. Briar saw it immediately. She approached at a walk and stopped in front of the chair. The room grew quiet. Grant felt an old expectation forming in the silence, the human desire to assign meaning before an animal had chosen an action. Briar lowered her head and touched her nose to the fabric. Once. She did not circle the chair. She did not place a paw over the strap. Tessa rose carefully, leaning on her cane. The movement drew Briar's attention. Tessa stood beside the pack and extended her hand. Briar looked from the hand to the chair. "Clear," Tessa said. The command was quiet. Briar stepped away from the backpack. She crossed first to Tessa and touched her nose to the back of her hand. Then she turned toward Grant. He had not expected that. Briar walked to him and waited. Grant offered his hand. Her nose met his skin. The contact was brief, the same gesture she had given him in the snow. But then the touch had granted him permission to approach a task she still carried alone. Now there was no object between them. Briar moved away and sat in the open space at the center of the group. Not beside a single handler, between them. Tessa lowered herself into the chair Grant pulled forward. "She will need secondary command training," she said. "Not with everyone. A designated team." Mira nodded. "After full medical clearance." Naomi looked around the room. "Who is primary if Tessa is unavailable?" Tessa answered without hesitation. "No one person." She pointed to the draft protocol on the table. "Medical authority remains with Mira. Field command with Naomi. Environmental alerts with Hannah. Canine handling transfers only through documented commands and approved handlers." Grant read the page. 6 weeks earlier, Tessa might have resisted dividing the work so precisely. Briar had been her partner, her responsibility, and the living extension of her judgment. Now Tessa was designing a system that would function even if she could not stand beside it. Grant signed beneath Naomi's name. Russell signed next, then Miles. The page moved around the table. Outside, light snow began falling over Clearhaven. The festival on the shore had reached its evening hours. Strings of warm lights glowed above the stalls. Music carried across the field, softened by distance and weather. Beyond the barriers, the lake lay untouched and quiet. Briar remained in the middle of the training room. The backpack stayed on the chair behind her. It had once held the data Tessa could not carry into the tunnel. Briar had guarded it because that was the only responsibility she had been given. The town had nearly failed for the same reason the dog had nearly frozen. One task had been left in one place, under one guardian, with no clear transfer. What returned from the tunnel was not merely the backpack. It was the understanding that information had to move. Authority had to move. Trust had to move. No one in Clearhaven had saved the lake alone. No one had brought Tessa home alone. And no one would be asked to hold the next failure alone until help arrived. Tessa looked at Briar. Grant followed her gaze. The shepherd was no longer watching the backpack. She was watching the room. Sometimes strength is not holding on longer. Sometimes it is knowing when to pass the weight to another pair of hands. Briar protected one backpack, but Clearhaven was saved only when people shared what they knew, trusted one another, and refused to leave anyone carrying the burden alone. In our own lives, there may be moments when asking for help is not weakness, but wisdom. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to Valor and Paw Stories for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. May you find trustworthy hands beside you whenever the road grows heavy.